it's something where everything Steve did was filmed. So while it seems kind of bizarre that his accident was filmed, it really wasn't. Everything he did with wildlife was filmed.
She watched her son step into a ballroom filled with strangers, cameras, and bright lights. And suddenly, Terri Irwin could not hold back the tears anymore. Not because she was weak, not because she was grieving again, but because the young man standing on that stage had quietly become something extraordinary. For years, the world saw Robert Irwin as Steve Irwin's little boy, the smiling child following crocodiles around Australia Zoo. But while everyone else was focused on the Irwin legacy, Terri was watching something far deeper unfold behind the scenes. And when the world finally saw it too, everything changed forever. The boy who grew up without a memory. Most people think they know Robert Irwin. To the public, he was always the cheerful little boy standing beside his famous father, Steve Irwin, smiling at animals, laughing around crocodiles, and growing up inside one of the most recognizable wildlife families in the world. For many people, that image never changed. Robert was simply Steve Irwin's son, the child audiences watched briefly on television before the cameras moved on. But the reality of Robert's story is far more emotional and far more complicated than most people realize. Robert Clarence Irwin was born on December 1st, 2003 in Queensland, Australia, the youngest child of Steve and Terri Irwin. From the moment he entered the world, his life was already surrounded by cameras, wildlife, and global attention. The Irwin family was unlike any other. Their lives revolved around conservation, Australia Zoo, and sharing their passion for animals with millions of viewers around the world. Then, in September 2006, everything changed forever. Steve Irwin died unexpectedly after being struck by a stingray while filming near the Great Barrier Reef. The tragedy shocked the entire world. Millions of people mourned the loss of the beloved crocodile hunter, whose energy and passion had inspired an entire generation. But while the public grieved a celebrity, the Irwin family lost a husband and a father, and Robert was only 2 years old, too young to fully understand what had happened, too young to create lasting memories of his father. That kind of loss creates a very specific type of grief, grieving someone you barely had the chance to know personally, while the rest of the world remembers them vividly. For years, Robert knew Steve mostly through old television episodes, photographs, home videos, and stories told by Terri and his sister, Bindi Irwin. While audiences could remember Steve's voice, personality, and humor clearly, Robert had to build his understanding of his father from fragments left behind. And yet, even as a child, people began noticing something unusual. After Steve's death, Terri suddenly found herself carrying enormous responsibility alone. She had to run Australia Zoo, protect Steve's global legacy, and raise 2 children under constant public attention, all while privately grieving one of the greatest losses imaginable. In interviews over the years, Terri admitted there were moments she felt completely overwhelmed, but she also noticed something remarkable about Robert from an early age. He connected with animals naturally, fearlessly, the same way Steve had. According to Terri, it wasn't something rehearsed or forced. Robert approached wildlife with curiosity and calmness instead of fear. By the time he was 4 years old, audiences watching television appearances alongside his family were already picking up on it too. This wasn't simply a child copying his father. There was something deeper there. And as Robert grew older, the similarities between him and Steve only became more impossible to ignore. When the resemblance became impossible to ignore, there's something deeply emotional and complicated about watching your child slowly grow into the person you once lost. For Terri Irwin, that experience became impossible to avoid as Robert Irwin grew older. Over the years, Terri has spoken openly about moments that catch her completely off guard. Moments where Robert says something, laughs a certain way, or becomes excited while talking about wildlife, and suddenly it feels as though Steve Irwin is standing in the room again. At first, the similarities seemed small, but as Robert entered his teenage years, they became impossible to ignore. Longtime fans of the Irwin family began noticing it too, not just emotionally, but physically. The resemblance between Robert and Steve became striking in ways that often left audiences stunned. The same posture, the same boundless energy, the same enthusiasm in front of cameras, even the same unique way of explaining animals to audiences with excitement and warmth. People who grew up watching Steve Irwin often described seeing Robert on television as surreal. It didn't feel like someone trying to imitate a famous parent. Instead, it felt natural, almost like history repeating itself in real time. But for Terri, those moments carried far more complicated emotions than they did for the public. Joy and grief existed together. Every similarity reminded her of the man she lost. But at the same time, every similarity also reminded her that a part of Steve still remained alive inside their son. As Robert grew older, he also began speaking more openly about his father in interviews. What surprised many people wasn't just what he said, but the emotional maturity behind his words. Robert understood something many children of famous figures struggle with for years. Steve Irwin was no longer simply his father. He had become a global icon, a role model, a symbol of wildlife conservation recognized around the world. And Robert understood the pressure that came with carrying that last name. He knew audiences constantly compared him to someone he barely had personal memories of. Yet, instead of avoiding those comparisons or becoming overwhelmed by them, he slowly learned how to carry that responsibility with grace. But something equally important also began happening beneath the surface. Robert wasn't becoming a copy of Steve. He was becoming his own person. And that distinction changed everything. Because while the resemblance initially captured public attention, it was Robert's individuality that truly made people connect with him. His personality, humor, emotional intelligence, and passion for conservation all began standing on their own. Terri quietly watched this transformation unfold over the years, and deep down, she carried a fear many surviving parents understand after tragedy. Would her son forever live trapped inside someone else's shadow? Eventually, the answer became clear. No, Robert Irwin wasn't simply continuing a legacy. He was building something entirely his own, building a life outside the shadow. There's a version of Robert Irwin's life where he becomes famous simply because of his last name. Most people would have understood that path. After all, being the son of Steve Irwin automatically placed him in the public eye from the moment he was born. The expectations surrounding him were enormous. Every time he appeared on television, interacted with animals, or spoke publicly, comparisons to his father followed immediately. For many celebrity children, that kind of pressure becomes overwhelming. Some spend years trying to escape the shadow of their parents. Others lean completely into it, becoming little more than extensions of a family legacy. But Robert chose a far more difficult path. Instead of simply inheriting fame, he slowly built an identity entirely his own, while still honoring everything his father represented. As a teenager, Robert began making regular appearances on The Tonight Show, starring Jimmy Fallon. Audiences instantly recognized the familiar Irwin energy when he walked onto the stage carrying exotic animals. There were snakes, birds, reptiles, and creatures most people would never dream of holding comfortably in public. But what made audiences connect with Robert wasn't just his knowledge about wildlife, it was his authenticity. He wasn't trying to imitate Steve. He wasn't performing a rehearsed personality for television cameras. His enthusiasm felt completely genuine. You could see it in the way he spoke about animals, the way he handled them carefully, and the way he laughed naturally during unexpected moments on stage. People responded because it felt real. Then another side of Robert began emerging: photography. Quietly and without much fanfare, Robert developed a serious passion for wildlife photography. What initially seemed like a hobby quickly evolved into something much more impressive. He began capturing breathtaking images of animals, landscapes, and conservation efforts throughout Australia and beyond. Soon, his photography started receiving international recognition. One image in particular deeply moved people around the world. In 2020, Robert received major praise for a haunting photograph showing the destruction left behind by Australia's devastating bushfires. The image captured more than environmental damage. It carried emotion, loss, urgency. Without saying a word, the photograph communicated exactly why conservation mattered. For Terri Irwin, the meaning behind Robert's work was immediately clear. He wasn't simply documenting nature, he was fighting for it. And unlike many young people raised under intense public scrutiny, Robert seemed to grow stronger under pressure rather than weaker. Instead of becoming trapped by expectations, he gradually transformed them into motivation. Then came something nobody expected: Dancing with the Stars. When Robert joined the competition years later, many assumed it would simply be another celebrity appearance attached to his famous last name. But almost immediately, audiences realized something different was happening. Week after week, Robert revealed sides of himself the public had never fully seen before. He wasn't just charismatic or entertaining, he was vulnerable, thoughtful, emotional. Viewers watched him open up in ways that felt deeply human and unexpectedly powerful. The more people watched him, the clearer something became. Robert Irwin was no longer simply Steve Irwin's son. He was becoming a star in his own right, and perhaps the person who understood that transformation first, long before the world finally noticed, was Terri herself. The night Terri couldn't hold back her tears. On October the 14th, 2025, Dancing with the Stars aired one of its most emotional episodes of the season, Dedication Night. The concept was simple but deeply personal. Each contestant would dedicate their performance to the person who had shaped their life the most. Some chose spouses, others chose mentors, siblings, or lifelong friends. Robert Irwin chose his mother, Terri Irwin. Even before the dance began, the atmosphere inside the ballroom felt different. During the pre-performance video package, Robert sat quietly beside the rehearsal floor as producers asked him what Terri meant to him. Almost immediately, he began struggling to hold back tears. For perhaps the first time on such a massive stage, audiences saw not the confident wildlife conservationist or television personality they had grown used to, but a son trying to put years of gratitude and pain into words. Robert spoke openly about losing his father, Steve Irwin, when he was only 2 years old. He explained that as he grew older, he slowly began understanding what Terri had truly endured after Steve's death. She wasn't simply grieving privately. She was carrying an entire family, an international conservation mission, and one of the most beloved public legacies in the world, all at the same time. Robert described how Terri raised 2 children under constant public attention while somehow continuing to run Australia Zoo and protect everything Steve had worked for. He admitted there were many moments growing up when he wished his father could have been there for birthdays, milestones, and important moments in life. But every single time, Terri was there instead. By the time Robert finished speaking, Terri was already crying in the audience. Then the music started. The contemporary routine that followed was not just a dance. It felt more like a story unfolding in real time. Every movement carried emotion, loss, resilience, love, grief, and survival. Robert danced with a level of vulnerability that surprised even long-time viewers of the show. This wasn't performance for the sake of entertainment, it felt deeply personal. As the routine progressed, the ballroom grew quieter. Audience members watched emotionally as Robert poured years of unspoken feelings into the choreography. The dance seemed to capture the invisible weight Terri had carried for nearly 2 decades, and the gratitude Robert felt for everything she sacrificed. When the final note played, Robert immediately walked straight toward his mother. Terri stood up before he even reached her. The two embraced tightly while the audience erupted around them. Moments later, Bindi Irwin rushed over and joined the hug, creating one of the most emotional scenes the show had witnessed in years. For a few moments, the competition itself completely disappeared. Judges struggled to speak through tears. One paused several times before giving feedback. Audience members openly cried in their seats. Even the hosts appeared visibly emotional, watching the Irwin family hold each other in the middle of the ballroom. What people were witnessing no longer felt like reality television. It felt real. Later, Terri reflected on the experience carefully during interviews. She explained that watching Robert perform created an overwhelming mixture of emotions she could barely describe. In some moments, she saw flashes of Steve, the same passion, sincerity, and emotional intensity. But at the same time, she also saw someone completely and unmistakably himself. And for Terri, that distinction meant everything, because in that moment, something finally became clear. Robert was not carrying Steve's legacy simply because he felt obligated to continue it. He wasn't trying to become a replacement for his father or live trapped inside someone else's shadow. He genuinely believed in the mission himself. Conservation, family, purpose, compassion. Those values belonged to Robert now too. And somehow, despite growing up under unimaginable pressure and heartbreak, he had become extraordinary in his own way. For Terri, that realization was overwhelming enough to bring her to tears long before the dance even ended. The moment Terri realized she did it. By the time the finale of Dancing with the Stars arrived in November 2025, something had completely shifted in the public conversation surrounding Robert Irwin. At the beginning of the season, many viewers saw him simply as the son of Steve Irwin, a familiar celebrity name stepping onto a reality competition show. But by the finale, that perception had changed entirely. Robert was no longer just part of the story. He had become the story. Week after week, audiences watched him reveal layers of himself they had never fully seen before. Beneath the humor, charm, and confidence was someone deeply thoughtful, emotionally intelligent, and quietly resilient. What began as curiosity about Steve Irwin's son slowly transformed into genuine admiration for Robert himself. Then, shortly before the finale aired, another revelation made the journey even more emotional. Robert had reportedly been dancing through a painful rib injury for weeks. The injury affected muscles between his ribs and caused significant discomfort during rehearsals and performances. Yet, despite the pain, he continued competing without publicly complaining or asking for sympathy. Behind the scenes, choreography adjustments were quietly made to help him continue safely. To many viewers, that determination immediately reminded them of Steve. The same persistence, the same refusal to quit, the same willingness to push through discomfort for something meaningful. But for Terri Irwin, the situation carried another layer entirely. She recognized strength, not just Steve's strength, her own. For nearly 2 decades after Steve's death, Terri had lived with enormous emotional pressure. She carried grief privately while running Australia Zoo publicly. She protected her children, preserved Steve's global conservation mission, and somehow continued moving forward despite unimaginable heartbreak. Watching Robert push himself quietly through pain felt deeply familiar to her, because she had spent years doing the same thing emotionally. On finale night, Robert performed with extraordinary intensity and confidence. Every routine seemed bigger than the last. The audience could feel the emotional momentum building throughout the ballroom as judges praised his growth, vulnerability, and stage presence. Then came the final freestyle routine. It brought the crowd to its feet almost immediately. Before scores were even announced, audience members erupted into a standing ovation. Judges described the performance as powerful, emotional, and unforgettable. Some struggled to fully express what they had just witnessed. Then, the moment finally arrived. Robert Irwin was crowned champion, exactly 10 years after his sister, Bindi Irwin, had won the very same competition. The symbolism overwhelmed everyone watching, especially Terri. But strangely, the most emotional moment of the night happened after the trophy presentation during post-show interviews. As cameras rolled, Robert began speaking openly about his mother, not in the polished, rehearsed way celebrities often speak during emotional television moments. His words felt raw and genuine. He talked about everything Terri endured after Steve's death, raising 2 children publicly while grieving privately, holding their family together while carrying the weight of a global legacy almost entirely on her own. Then Robert said something that deeply moved audiences. He explained that for years the world underestimated Terri's strength, and hearing her son recognize that publicly seemed to affect Terri more than winning ever could, because in that moment she realized something profound. She had done it, not just survived tragedy, not just protected Steve's memory. She had successfully raised children who were compassionate, resilient, emotionally aware, and capable of carrying the Irwin mission forward without losing themselves in the process. That realization was what finally broke her emotionally, not weakness. Relief. For nearly 20 years, Terri had carried grief, responsibility, pressure, and fear on her shoulders while trying to ensure her children could still grow into happy, grounded people despite the enormous shadow surrounding their family. Now, standing there watching Robert hold that trophy, she could finally see the result of everything she fought for. Robert had become extraordinary, not because he became Steve Irwin, but because he became fully and completely himself. And perhaps, more than any trophy or television victory, that was the outcome Steve would have been proudest of all. The story of Terri and Robert Irwin is about far more than fame, wildlife, or television. At its heart, it's about grief, resilience, family, and what happens when love survives unimaginable loss. Terri spent nearly 2 decades holding her family together while protecting the legacy Steve Irwin left behind. And now, watching Robert step confidently into his own future, the world is finally seeing the result of everything she sacrificed. Robert Irwin is no longer just the little boy audiences remember from old wildlife clips. He has become a conservationist, performer, photographer, and storyteller with a voice entirely his own. But through every achievement, one thing remains clear. Family is still at the center of everything the Irwins do. What do you think about Terri and Robert's emotional journey? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more incredible stories like this.